Coming up on The World Today. World leaders react to President Putin's partial mobilization to be sent to Ukraine. Nigeria's president addresses United Nations General Assembly, reiterates promise to entrench process, free, fair and transparent, credible elections in 2023. And Japanese man sets himself on fire in apparent protest at former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's state funeral. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Millicent Walker in Lagos. Russian President Vladimir Putin has announced a partial mobilization. This is today, a move that will see 300,000 Russian citizens in the military reserves called up to serve in Ukraine. The development marked a significant escalation of Russia's war on Ukraine and just came a day after a series of coordinated moves towards annexation referendums in Russian-occupied Ukrainian areas. Now, he accused the West of wanting to see Russia weakened and said a threat to retaliate further was not a bluff. Mr. Putin effectively announced plans to annex 4 Ukrainian regions, saying Moscow would facilitate regions in joining Russia referendums in Ukraine's Luhansk, Donetsk, Zaporizhia and Kherson. A day earlier, Russian-installed officials in the 4 regions announced plans for such votes, which Western countries denounced as shams. Meanwhile, flights out of Russia quickly sold out following the announcement of Russia's first military mobilization since World War II, a dramatic reversal after months in which Moscow had insisted its operation was going to plan. And speaking shortly after Mr. Putin, Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu said that Russia would draft that number, 300,000 additional personnel out of some 25 million potential fighters at Moscow's disposal. The mobilization, the first since the Soviet Union, begins immediately. In Moscow's first update on casualty numbers in almost 6 months, Minister Shoigu said 5,937 Russian soldiers had been killed since the start of the conflict. President Putin had ordered Russia's mobilization since World War II in his earlier address today. And world leaders have been reacting to Putin's partial mobilization announcement. A few moments ago, U.S. President Joe Biden delivered a harsh rebuke to Russian President in a speech at the United Nations, saying Russia's invasion of Ukraine shamelessly violates the UN Charter and declaring atrocities in Ukraine, he said, should make your blood run cold. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said that he did not believe the world would allow Vladimir Putin to use nuclear weapons and pledged to press on with liberating Ukrainian territory captured by Russian forces. Zelensky was speaking to Germany's Bild television in an interview published hours after Russia's president's announcement. And NATO Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg said that Putin's military mobilization is a dangerous and reckless nuclear rhetoric. He also warned that more troops will escalate the conflict in Ukraine. For the British Foreign Office Minister Gillian Keegan, he says clearly it's something that we should take very seriously because, you know, we are not in control. I'm not sure he is in control either, really. This is obviously an escalation. Germany's vice-chancellor called it another bad and wrong step from Russia, which, of course, he says will be discussed and consulted on politically regarding how to respond. He says Russian sham referendums in Ukraine will never be recognized. Foreign policy spokesman for the European Union, Peter Stano, said it's just another proof that Putin is not interested in peace and that he is interested in escalating the war of aggression. He says this is yet another sign of his desperation. China also reacted to this, but the Foreign Ministry urged all parties to engage in dialogue and consultation and find a way to address the security concerns of all parties. Romania reacted thus, saying today is International Peace Day, and instead of celebrating it properly, unfortunately, it said this morning we took note with concern of President Putin's statement regarding the mobilization and the so-called referenda. For Lithuania, since Russia's military mobilization will also be carried out in Kaliningrad region, in our neighborhood, Lithuania cannot just watch. We also heard from Russian critic Alexei Navalny, who says this will result in a massive tragedy. VOA's Anna Chernikova joins us now for the latest. Anna, so good to see you. Talk to us, I mean, how people in Ukraine, Kyiv where you are reacting to this televised address by Russia's president.
Yeah, hello, good evening. Well, I should say that it was not a complete surprise for Ukrainian society and Ukrainian officials. You know, this partial mobilization, information about the partial mobilization was in the air. And as President Zelensky mentioned, Ukrainian intelligence reported at least during the last months, there were reports that this hidden mobilization is taking place. So basically, President Zelensky said that this is not a news for him, and this is not a surprise, and this is something that also, as I already said, was expected, quite expected. Ukrainian society, well, Ukrainian soldiers, interesting reaction from them. They said that they don't care how many people will be on that side, they will continue to defend their land. And similar reaction is coming from Ukrainian military officials. Also, President Zelensky made his comments on President Putin's nuclear comments, and President Zelensky said that he did not believe that President Putin would use nuclear weapons, but of course we never know what this man, talking about President of Russian Federation, has in mind, said Zelensky. So this is a kind of a reaction. Again, also President Zelensky later on during the day, basically just a couple of minutes ago, he also made another remark that Ukraine will continue to do its task to protecting its land, its country, and defending itself. So we should not listen to what's happening in other countries, like in the country of that is following the impression and that came to war to us. But we just have to follow our own route and do what we have to do to defend our land.
And also, Anna, I mean, Moscow-backed separatists in Ukraine are calling for a referendum. Will this happen? Will this pave way for the former Russian annexation? What are you hearing?
So these reports are coming for a couple of months now in these areas which are under temporary occupation. Local Ukrainian Ukrainian authorities in these areas who are still present. I mean, they're not obviously on the territories, but they are still existing. So they are saying that this. So basically, they will do everything possible to not make it happen. And also, Ukraine in this territory there is a very strong partisan movement, which is making it much more difficult for Russian forces to get ready to this referendum. But again, as Ukrainian authorities and President Zelensky himself already mentioned before, that these referendums would never be recognized, of course, by Ukraine. And if this happens, President Zelensky said it a couple of times already, this would end any possibility for any further negotiations with Russia. So, I mean, the position of Ukrainian side doesn't really change. Maybe, apparently we will hear some more details from President Zelensky later on in maybe in his evening speech. But for the moment, situation is as following. So this referendum would never be recognized by Ukrainian side, and this would basically, again, according to the president, this would end any possibility for negotiations with Russia.
I know you said that this is a temporary hold of the Russians, and that's where this is taking place with the Moscow-backed separatists. But if we were to ask, how much territory could Ukraine lose if this were to go ahead?
Well, it's quite a lot. So here we are talking about a huge part of Luhansk region. So Luhansk region for the moment is almost completely under occupation. Some settlements and villages are liberated already by Ukrainian forces, and Ukrainian forces are advancing in that areas as well. But at the moment, very heavy fightings are happening. So we cannot talk about complete liberation. Complete advance, yeah. But fightings are happening. So we talk about a huge amount of Luhansk region, some part of Donetsk region. Also, there is Kherson region, which is mostly on the other side of the Dnieper River, and part of the Zaporizhzhia region. So it's quite a lot, and what is important to understand that having this, Kherson region under control, Russia provides Crimea with important connection to land and water supply and so on and so forth. So, of course, this is something that definitely cannot just be watched. It should be a reaction. And actually, President Zelensky also asked international community and Ukrainian and all the international partners in Ukraine to go on with more sanctions because of this announcement by President Putin.
And finally, before we let you go, Anna, it's quite interesting to note yesterday, Turkey's president was talking about a significant step that will be made, seemingly suggesting Russia's president was willing to end the war. And then this morning, we hear from the president mobilizing. One wonders, what is happening. Is it that the Turkish president perhaps was, there was just a lot of hope for him, and then Russia's president went and did, something else. What do you make of, what we're hearing, what is playing out?
He actually said something similar to also Prime Minister of India during their latest meeting. It looks like, in general, President Putin probably wants to end the war, but he wants to end this war under his conditions and under his, plan. And this is something that's not going to happen if we look at the Ukrainian perspective. So apparently, President Putin was, trying to give certain hints that he is ready to negotiate, but again, at the same time, he is saying that peace is only possible under Russian rules. So I don't think that we all should, think of what President Putin said in terms of his willingness for peace. We should not think about, peace which would be good for Ukraine. So President Putin, as he already mentioned a lot of times, he wants the full control of Ukraine because, he wants to liberate, as he put it, Ukrainian people from Nazism and so on and so forth. So he wants the full control, and Ukrainian people do not want to give their land, and they will defend their land and their people. They do not need any liberation, any, help from Russia. This is for sure. So the only peace President Putin for the moment is ready for. At least this is how it looks from his, latest comments and latest actions, especially, is peace under his rules. And this is something that Ukraine would never accept, because for Ukraine it would mean just the end of its existence. So this is kind of, very tricky. I think very tricky thing to, analyze, because President Putin has something special in his mind, and this is definitely something that which would only mean his point of view and his goals.
Anna Chernikova, live from Kyiv, VOA's Anna Chernikova. Thank you. Always a pleasure. Continue to stay safe.
Thank you.
More stories now coming in from Ukraine. McDonald's eateries in Kyiv has reopened, a symbol of the war-torn country's return to some sense of normalcy and a show of support after the American fast food chain pulled out of Russia. The burger giant closed its Ukrainian restaurants after Russia's invasion nearly 7 months ago, but has continued to pay more than 10,000 McDonald's employees in the country. The 3 restaurants that have reopened in the capital are offering a delivery service only, but there was no shortage of customers on Tuesday, that's yesterday, as delivery drivers streamed in and out collecting orders. Well, staying with global food security, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken joined world leaders in highlighting Russia's invasion of Ukraine as a contributing factor to high rates of global food crisis. Speaking at the Global Food Security Summit, he painted a picture of an already grim food security landscape when Russia launched its war in Ukraine.
Thank you.
At the outset of 2022, conflicts, COVID-19, the effects of the climate crisis had already driven more than 190 million people into acute food insecurity. According to the World Food Program, President Putin's brutal war of aggression in Ukraine may add 70 million people on top of that, an already staggering number becoming even more staggering. That agreement should never have been necessary in the first place. The only reason it was is because Russia, having invaded Ukraine, was then blockading its ports and preventing food that had been feeding the world from getting out. But we had to deal with the reality before us, and the deal that was brokered by the United Nations with Turkey's assistance actually enabled the grain to start moving again.
Russia must end its illegal war against Ukraine, which has threatened an essential source of the world's food supply. The truth is that Putin is trying to blackmail the international community with a large part of the world's food needs.
The U.S. Secretary of State also spoke on how the U.S. will never recognize Russia's plans to hold referenda in parts of Ukraine.
For the United Nations, for the General Assembly, for the United Nations Charter, the very principles that we're here to uphold this week in the Charter, sovereignty, independence, territorial integrity, are what are being violently aggressed by Russia, including through the attempts to proceed with these referenda and putting even more forces into the effort to seize Ukrainian sovereign territory. I think it's also not a surprise that this is happening now. We've seen in the last weeks significant gains by Ukraine in taking back the land, its land, seized by Russian forces since the aggression began February 24th. It's also a time when Russia itself is seeing serious reverses on the battlefield, and even some of its closest partners are clearly raising their deep concerns about what Russia is doing and the consequences this is having for countries around the world. And I'd also say, none of this, the sham referenda, the potential mobilization of additional forces, is a sign of strength. On the contrary, it's a sign of weakness. It's the sign of Russian failure. Let me be very clear. If these referenda proceed, and if Russia purports to annex Ukrainian territory, the United States will never, never recognize it.
Coming up on the program. We have more on Russia's invasion of Ukraine, plus the UN General Assembly as UN chief calls for solidarity to tackle global challenges. Please stay with us. Welcome back. Staying with Russia's invasion of Ukraine, it is taking center stage at the United Nations General Assembly. Other leaders have condemned what they call Putin's imperialism, calling for immediate talks. Romania's president said there was no justification for bloodshed, destruction, and human suffering.
President Putin's brutal war of aggression.
There is no justification for a military aggression against a sovereign state. There is no justification for bloodshed, destruction, and human suffering. It is our joint responsibility to come together and uphold our common values as members of the United Nations. Democracy and universal human rights are legitimate aspirations for all humankind. We therefore need to act now and support all those who fight for freedom and democracy. Since the beginning of the conflict, over 2.3 million Ukrainians have crossed our borders. Romania has offered not only emergency assistance, but also medium and long-term support for those who decided to stay in our country with free access to education, health services, and the labor market. In addition, we offered direct humanitarian assistance and put in place a logistic hub for coordinating the international humanitarian assistance from the entire world. Weaponizing access to food and restricting it around the world are unacceptable. In order to support the Ukrainian economy and help manage the global food crisis, Romania has acted in a responsible way by facilitating the export of more than 4 million tons of Ukrainian grain, which represents 60% of the grain exported by Ukraine through our ports on the Danube and at the Black Sea since the beginning of the crisis.
On behalf of the Assembly,
Well, staying with the Assembly, France President Emmanuel Macron warned that Russia's invasion of Ukraine was dividing the world and restoring the age of imperialism and colonies. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz urged UN member states not to concede to Russia in peace negotiations. Italian Prime Minister Mario Draghi denounced Russia's invasion of Ukraine, but he believes it was imperative to find a lasting solution for peace. Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida condemned Russia's invasion of Ukraine as destabilizing the international order to its core, insisting that the rule of law, not coercion by power, should prevail. For Poland, while the conflict has garnered much attention since it began earlier this year, it is naturally of special significance to Poland, which shares a border with Ukraine. Polish President Andrzej Duda embraced the righteousness of the Ukrainian cause. Well, there is more from the ongoing United Nations General Assembly meeting where President Muhammadu Buhari this afternoon addressed the gathering in New York. After the address, President Buhari joined fellow African and foreign leaders to hold a high-level meeting to mark the commemoration of the 30th anniversary of the adoption of the Declaration on the Rights of Persons Belonging to National, Ethnic, Religious and Linguistic Minorities. The president was the first speaker at today's session, delivering Nigeria's statement on the overall theme, a watershed moment, transformative solutions to interlocking challenges. During his speech, President Buhari spoke of Nigeria's efforts in achieving the global net zero aspiration, as his administration last year adopted a climate change strategy aimed at mitigation.
Climate change reduces opportunity and prosperity, which in Africa, Latin America, and some parts of Asia also contribute to transitional organized crimes. As part of Nigeria's effort at achieving our global net zero aspiration, The current administration last year adopted a national climate change strategy that aims to deliver climate change mitigation in a sustainable manner. The measures we took at the national level also require climate justice. Africa and other developing nations produce only a small proportion of greenhouse gas emissions compared to industrialized economies. Yet, we are the hardest hit by the consequences of climate change, as we see in the sustained droughts in Somalia and floods of unprecedented severity in Pakistan. These and other climate-related occurrences are now suddenly becoming widely commonplace in the developing world. We are, in effect, literally paying the price for policies that others pursue. This needs to change.
The president also spoke about the country's upcoming elections in 2023, promising a free and fair exercise, even as he announced that this would be his last address as president of Nigeria because his political term is ending.
In Nigeria, not only have we worked to strengthen our democracy, but we have supported it and promoted the rule of law in our sub-region. In the Gambia, we helped to guarantee the fast democratic transition since independence. In Guinea-Bissau, we stood by the democratically elected government when it faced mutiny. And in the Republic of Chad, following the tragic death of its president, the late Idris Deby Itno, in the battlefield, we joined forces with its other neighbors and international partners to stabilize the country and encourage the peaceful transition to democracy, a process which is ongoing. We believe in the sanctity of constitutional term limits, and we have steadfastly adhered to it in Nigeria. We have seen the corrosive impact on values when leaders elsewhere seek to change the rules to stay on power. Indeed, we now are preparing for general elections in Nigeria next February. As the 78th Anga, there will be a new face at this podium speaking for Nigeria. Ours is a vast country, strengthened by its diversity and its common values of hard work, enduring faith, and a sense of community. We have invested heavily to strengthen our framework for free and fair elections. I thank our partners for all the support that they have provided our elections. As president, I have set the goal that one of the enduring legacies I would like to leave is to entrench a process of free, fair, and transparent, credible election through which Nigerians elect their choice.
Nigeria's President Muhammadu Buhari at the UN General Assembly earlier today. Meanwhile, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres says that the world is in big trouble and needs collective action across the board. He made this comment while addressing the UN General Assembly just before the general debate opening, adding that the crises such as the war in Ukraine, the climate emergency, the dire financial situation of developing countries threaten the very future of humanity. He called for concerted action to help developing countries which are getting hit from all sides, stressing the need to address climate change and biodiversity losses.
Our world is in big trouble. Divides are growing deeper, inequalities are growing wider, and challenges are spreading farther. We need the coalition of the world. Excellence.
We are seeing the threat of dangerous divisions between what...
This crisis threatens the very future of humanity and the fate of our planet. The international community is not ready or willing to tackle the big, dramatic challenges of our age.
The funding gap for a global humanitarian. The review conference of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty failed to reach consensus, and a nuclear deal with Iran remains elusive.
Let me be clear. The SDG stimulus I'm proposing is essential, but it is only an interim measure. Today's global financial system was created by rich countries to serve their interests many decades ago. It expands and entrenches inequalities. It requires deep structural reform. And my report on our common agenda proposes a new global deal to rebalance power and resources between developed and developing countries.
Arbitration and judicial.
There have been other meetings on the sidelines of the 77th United Nations General Assembly, one of which is an event entitled Countdown to COP15, landmark leaders' event for a nature-positive world, which precedes the December summit in Montreal, Canada, of the UN Convention on Biological Diversity, known as COP15. Well, at the meeting, government and civil society leaders announced new conservation pledges.
Earlier this year, Canada made the choice to step up and welcome the world to Montreal for COP15 in just a few months. In Montreal, just like here tonight, Canada will be calling upon the world to mobilize around a key date, 2030. Because by 2030, we need to do two things. First, halt and reverse biodiversity loss, and second, protect at least 30% of the world's land and oceans. This is an ambitious goal. Of that, there is no doubt. But our experience at home shows that it's absolutely within reach.
Excellencies, dear friends, today's suicidal war on nature will have devastating consequences for us all. It is fueling the climate crisis, driving species to extinction and destroying ecosystems. It's making growing areas of our planet inhospitable, driving conflict and pandemics, and jeopardizing our sustainable development goals. We need to act now, urgently and at scale. Biodiversity is the web of life that connects all our lives. In Montreal this December, at the UN Biodiversity Conference, the world must agree on a post-2020 global biodiversity framework. It is an opportunity that we cannot afford to miss.
Europe is ready to aim high, but we must do this together. And for that, I believe we need three key commitments in Montreal. First, an ambitious global framework to stop and reverse biodiversity loss and protect 30% of land and ocean globally. Second, we need measurable goals and targets, supported by a fair monitoring system to keep track of progress. And third, we need to scale up biodiversity financing from all sources, public and private, domestic and international. As I announced last year, the European Union is doubling its global biodiversity financing, especially for the most vulnerable countries. And I encourage all international donors to live up to the same level of ambition. I know this will not be easy, but we can do it. I call on all leaders to come together to adopt an ambitious global deal to protect the biodiversity of our common home. Let's have the courage to do what is right. And let's do it now.
Leaders reaffirming their commitment to reverse biodiversity loss. And British Prime Minister Liz Truss says the government would announce a new scheme today to support businesses with their energy bills and help them get through the winter. The announcement came during her visit to New York for the United Nations General Assembly. Britain says it would cap the wholesale cost of electricity and gas for businesses at less than half the market rate from next month.
Well, we know that businesses are very concerned about the level of their energy bills. That's why we are putting in place a scheme for business that will be equivalent to the scheme for households to make sure that businesses are able to get through the winter. We're going to review it after 6 months. We'll make sure that the most vulnerable businesses, like pubs, like shops, continue to be supported after that. And we'll be announcing the scheme on Wednesday, but what I can say is that the scheme will apply from the 1st of October to make sure businesses have that security through the winter.
Away from Onga, according to news just coming in, Donald Trump, former president of the US, and 3 of his children have been hit by a fraud lawsuit after a New York investigation into their family business. It alleges that the Trump organization committed numerous acts of fraud between 2011 and 2021. New York Attorney General Letitia James is asking a court to bar Mr. Trump and his children from serving as officers or directors in any New York business. The Trump organization has denied any wrongdoing. China's foreign ministry has asked the United States to stop being a troublemaker after a U.S. Navy warship and Canadian frigate made a routine transit through the Taiwan Strait yesterday. The transit was the second in a month by a U.S. Navy ship and the second jointly by the U.S. and Canada in less than a year since October 2021. While China condemned the mission, saying its forces warned the ships, recent years have seen U.S. warships and occasionally those of allied nations such as Britain and Canada routinely sail through the strait. And a Japanese man has set himself alight, reportedly to protest a state funeral for ex-Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, who was assassinated in July. Hundreds of foreign dignitaries are expected to attend the funeral on later in September. On Wednesday, witnesses called police after spotting a man on fire near the Prime Minister's office in Tokyo. Officers put out the blaze and took the still conscious man to hospital. Japanese media reports say the man is believed to be in his 70s. The government is yet to comment on the protest, but public opposition to the holding of the state funeral has intensified in recent months, with polls showing a majority of voters unhappy with the expenditure. And still to come on the program. Chinese theme parks launch new promotions to entice tourists ahead of holiday season. Stay with us. And close to 8 million people have been displaced by the disaster, and the UN, along with authorities and partners who have continued to race to reach affected populations with desperately needed relief items. Hungry men, women and children holding assorted pots, pans, staying in camps set up by a private NGO for people displaced by the recent floods in Pakistan. The stagnant waters have led to not only serious health issues, but also rising hunger among the displaced people. The deluge has affected nearly 33 million people in the South Asian nation of 220 million, sweeping away homes, crops, bridges, roads and livestock in damages estimated at $30 billion. Officials are warning they now risk losing control of the spread of infections in a dire situation that the World Health Organization described as deadly, heartbreaking. And 2 people have been confirmed killed from a 7.7 magnitude earthquake in Mexico, and more than 3,000 buildings damaged, most in western states near the epicenter of the state. The earthquake shook central Mexico Monday right after a drill to commemorate the devastating tremors 1985 and 2017. According to the country's monitoring agency, the epicenter was 63 kilometers south of the area, with a depth of 15 kilometers. Well, in that town, there has been significant damage to hospitals, schools, public buildings, homes, and recovery, they say, could take years. But despite the earthquake that jolted Mexico, normalcy is gradually returning to the area as civil facilities involving power, water supplies, communications have been basically restored. The epicenter of the quake is about 750 kilometers away from the capital, Mexico City. And as at yesterday, local authorities had restored the roads connecting the city and the epicenter to ensure the delivery of relief supplies to affected people timely. And back on the African continent, members of South Africa's police and prison civil rights union are up in arms against the government over what their pay rise should be. The government is offering a 3% raise. However, the union insists on 10%. They've marched to the union's building in Pretoria to hand over a memorandum of demands to the country's police minister and Justice and Correctional Services minister.
The members of the Police and Prison Civil Rights Union, POP-CRU, marched through Pretoria, the South African capital, while their colleagues in uniform kept watch and guided, probably silently happy this is also for their benefit. This is their demand. No to a 3% wage increase offered by their employer at the bargaining council. They want 10% instead to be able to meet their personal obligations as they serve the nation, as well as a better working environment to fight crime, among other issues.
3 financial years without a salary increment. And we want to say today whether there is nothing to negotiate for. There is nothing to negotiate for. We can't sit down and negotiate for 3%. We want salaries. We want better life. We want just salaries. 10% is not even above the said 7% inflation. We just need 10%. After 3 years having not been increased, just 10%. That is what we want.
When you give workers here 3%, it means a month you are giving them an increase of 450 rands. They are demanding 10%. What does that mean? 10%, it means that they are only demanding 1,500 or 1,400 a month, which is almost equal to the 3% that an ordinary MP is receiving when you give them 3%.
The Labour leaders handed their memorandum of demands to the Minister of Police, Bheki Cele, and of Justice and Correctional Services, Ronald Lamola. Both tried to speak to the sometimes unreceptive crowd.
We have indeed received the memorandum, and as you are aware, we have to take it through the processes of the bargaining council and all processes. We will take it through and ensure that the issues that have been raised through the processes and on the issues that have been raised with regard to correctional services. We have noted all of them.
The Labour Union has given government 21 days to sit and discuss with them and respond to their demands, or they will actually down tools and march to Parliament in Cape Town, where they will stage a sit-in in protest if need be. From Johannesburg, South Africa, Betty Dibia, Channels Television News.
Still in Africa, many Africans use charcoal for cooking, but the effects over the years have been disastrous for the continent's forests and environment. However, thanks to an energy-saving cooking stove in Kampala, Uganda, life is becoming easier for residents with the introduction of this environmentally friendly solution. Take a look.
Nabila Anwari used to spend hours bending over a smoky charcoal stove to get her family's lunch ready in Uganda's capital, Kampala. Today, the Eco stove allows her to prepare meals in as little as 15 minutes. The stoves use heat-holding volcanic rocks broken down to the size of charcoal. The rocks are heated using starter briquettes and then remain hot for hours with the help of a fan blowing a continuous flow of air over them.
When it comes to Eco stove, we use volcanic rocks, whereby we don't need to cut down trees. We're now saving our environment with Eco stove. It is all about saving. But when it comes to a charcoal stove, cut down trees, keep your hands dirty, let's say the walls, everything is always dirty. And the saucepans, you always basically have to be washing them all the time because that charcoal produces a lot of smoke. With Eco stove, you're sorted. Smoke-free, you save 75% of your income. So I find myself saving, because actually here with Eco stove, I don't use what I've been using when I'm with charcoal. So I save.
The stove is manufactured by a locally based company, Eco Group Limited, which was created in 2010 by Ugandan entrepreneur Rose Twine. Twine says the main aim is to provide an efficient form of cooking energy that is user-friendly and good for the environment. The volcanic rocks are a largely environmental-friendly form of cooking because, unlike charcoal, kerosene, gas and firewood, they do not emit climate-changing gases and produce no smoke at all.
You cannot make this stone work unless you have forced air. Now that's I'm explaining about this. When you see these holes here, of course this is erupted volcanic lava. Now when the lava erupts, of course it emits a lot of fumes and the like, so these are the pores you see. Now for these stones, as heavy as it is, to be able to catch fire and become red hot, it needed forced oxygen. You see the normal charcoal, you just open the door and the little draft will come in and then the charcoal will become red hot. It doesn't happen with the same. So technology needed us to come up with the way you force air to induce burning. And this is what it is in the stove.
The volcanic rocks can be repeatedly heated for up to 2 years with the aid of the fan, which is solar powered and needs very little energy. But Twine adds that while the company works on reducing the cost of the stove, it's still a cheaper and cleaner alternative to charcoal, with a little over 100,000 people across Uganda currently using the Eco stoves.
The stove is way cheaper. The Eco stove with the rocks for 2 years, the starting package is $350. That is about $100 for 2 years. Somebody is cooking for $100 for 2 years. That shows it's cheap. So we believe it's affordable. It's just that we want to sensitize more people so that people can know there is an option, there is an alternative.
According to the Ugandan Bureau of Statistics, about 94% of Ugandan households use firewood or charcoal for cooking. Only 20% of households had access to electricity in 2014. And most of those connected to the grid rarely use electricity for cooking because of the high costs involved.
Finally on the program, tourists may now have something to look forward to ahead of the upcoming National Day holiday in China, as theme parks around the country have introduced a number of limited entertainment activities and increased package discounts to entice more visitors. At the Universal Beijing Resort, a whole host of energetic set-piece performances that incorporate a variety of movie roles kicked off recently at the park's Hollywood Boulevard. Visitors can experience a simulated movie shooting site and even try their hands at becoming actors, actresses, or even directors. with the Universal Resort marking the one-year anniversary of its opening. Figures show the park has attracted over 13.8 million visitors over the past year, with more than 68,000 performances, totaling some 14,000 hours staged at that time period. Many say they are enjoying the pleasant autumnal weather in the Chinese capital ahead of the 7-day-long National Day holiday, which begins October 1st. Your next destination, perhaps? Well, that's our program this evening. Thank you for watching. I'm Melissa Ntalwaka. Bye for now.